During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day, in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy
house of Usher.
I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half pleasurable, because poetic, sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me,
upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain,
upon the bleak walls,
upon the vacant eye-like windows,
upon a few rank sedges,
and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees,
with an utter depression of soul, which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than the after-dream of the reveller.
Upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil, there was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed of dreariness of thought, which no goading of the imagination could torture into all the sublime. What was it?
I paused to think.
What was it that so nerved me in the contemplation of
the house of Usher?
Although, as boys, we had been even intimate associates, yet I really knew little of my friend. His reserve had been always excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, for peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages in many works of exalted art, and manifested, of late, in repeated deeds of magnificent yet unobtrusive charity, as well as in a passionate devotion to the intricacies, perhaps even more than to the orthodox and easily recognizable beauties of musical science. I had learned, too, the very remarkable fact that the stem of the Usher family, all time honored as it was, had put forth, at no period, any enduring branch. In other words, that the entire family lay in the direct line of descent and had always, with very trifling and very temporary variation, so lain.
It was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the consequent and deviating transmission from sir to son of the patrimony with the name, which had at length so identified the two as to merge the original title of the estate in the quaint and equivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include, in the minds of peasantry who used it, both the family and the family mansion.
Noticing these things, I rode over a short causeway to the house. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway of the hall. A valet of stealthy step thence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiments of which I have already spoken. While the objects around me, while the carvings of the ceilings, the somber tapestries of the walls, the ebon blackness of the floors, and the phantasmagoric armorial trophies which rattled as I strolled, were but matters to which, or to such as which, I had been accustomed from my infancy. While I hesitated not to acknowledge how familiar was all this, I still wondered to find how unfamiliar were the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up.
It was thus that he spoke of the object of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and family evil, and one for which he desired to find a remedy, a mere nervous affection he immediately aided, which will undoubtedly soon pass off. It displayed itself in a host of unitary sensations. Some of these, as he detailed them, interested and bewildered me, although perhaps the terms and the general manner of their narrations and their weight, he suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. The most insipid food was alone endurable. He could wear only garments of certain texture. The odors of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tortured by even a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and these from stringed instruments which did not inspire him with horror.
While he spoke, the Lady Madeleine, for so was she called, passed through a remote portion of the apartment, and, without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not unmingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me as my eyes followed her steps, when a door at length closed upon her. My glance sought instinctively and eagerly the countenance of the brother, but he had buried his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more than ordinary weakness had overspread the immaculated fingers through which quickened many passionate tears.
The disease of the Lady Madeleine had long baffled the skill of her physicians. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent, although transient, affections of a partly cataleptical character were the usual diagnosis. Hitherto, she had steadily borne up against the pressure of her malady, and had not betaken herself finally to bed. But on the closing in of the evening of my arrival at the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at night with inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer.
And now, some days of bigger grief had elapsed. An observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupation were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with worried, unequal, and objectless step.
The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue, but the luminousness of his eye had utterly gone out. The once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more, and a tremulous quaver, as if of extreme horror, habitually characterized his utterance.
His countenance was, as usual, cadaverously wan, but moreover, there was a species of mad hilarity in his eyes, and evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor. His air appalled at me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured, and I even welcomed his presence as a relief. "And you have not seen it?" he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments in silence. "You have not then seen it? But stay, you should." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements, and threw it fairly open to the storm.
His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity. But, as I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quivered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in a low, hurried, and gibbering murmur, as if unconscious of my presence. Bending closely over him, I at length drank in the hideous import of his words. "Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and have heard it. Long, many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it. Yet I dare not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many days ago, yet I dared not. I did not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, ha! The breaking of the hermit's door, and the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield, say rather, the rending of a coffin, and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and her struggles within the coppered archway of the vault. Oh, whither shall I fly? Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to upbraid me for my haste? Have I not heard her footstep on the stair? Do I not distinguish the heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman!
Here, he sprang furiously to his feet and shrieked out his syllables, as if in the effort he were giving up his soul.
Madman! I tell you that she now stands without the door.
From that chamber and from that mansion, I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath. As I found myself crossing the old causeway, suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued, for the vast house and its shadows were along behind me. The radiance was that of the full, setting, and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure of which I have before spoken, as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled. As I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder, there was a long tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep dark tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher.